Hello and welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. Happy 2024! We are kicking off a new year with a viewer-requested topic, and that is menstruation and ritual purity. Basically, should modern Kemetic pagans who have female reproductive organs abstain from doing ritual work when they're on their period? Before I give my answer, let's look at some historical references and some comparisons with other cultures that could give us some surprising insights. First, I'd like to point out that ancient Egyptian women probably on average had fewer periods than we modern Westerners do, because they were pregnant far more often. And the ancient Egyptians did understand the connection between the two, because there is a tale of Setna Kaiwas and Saosir from the late period, different kind of period, and it describes him and his wife. And it says that when her time of purification came, she had the sign of a woman who had conceived. And they would say, someone had her time of purification, but no purification came. Because that was the word that they used. Instead of Aunt Flo, how they referred to menstruation was hesmen, which is a word connected to natron and purity and purification. So that suggests that there was a notion of purity, or perhaps lack thereof, when a woman was menstruating. We also know from work records from the village of Deir el-Medina that men who had come in contact with a menstruating woman could not go to work in the tomb until they had undergone some kind of purification themselves. And there's been some debate on how that should be interpreted. But again, that does suggest that there was something that they considered precluding you from certain activities if you came in contact with that. Now, despite the ambiguity that we now have about those specific examples, we do know, thanks to the work of Winifred S. Blackman, who wrote The Fellahin of Upper Egypt. She worked as an anthropologist in Egypt in the turn of the century, and she described Coptic practices that unequivocally viewed menstruation as something unclean. We also know from modern Islam that it's taboo to have sex with a woman who is on her period, and if a woman is menstruating, then she's considered exempt from fasting during the month of Ramadan. So put together, all of these references do suggest that in ancient Egypt, if you were on your period, that automatically opted you out of certain activities. But this line of thinking is also found in other cultures as well, including modern ones. In Hinduism, once a girl hits puberty and starts to have periods, there are certain aspects of the Durga Puja festival that she can no longer participate in. And because Hinduism is a living, evolving, modern religion, modern sources will try to use science to explain really what are age-old taboos. A great example here is in this book on puja, which is the Hindu offering rite. And it was published by Amachi, who's called the Hugging Saint. And on the first page, it says, "Women during menses should not do puja. There is a wheel of subtle nerves which collect the impurities of the body, which are then discharged during menses. It is a natural cleansing process which only women have. Women therefore go through a regular process of purification." Funny the parallel of the language there. "Which can make it easier for them to overcome Maya, at least on the physical plane." Maya being, illusion and, obstacle. But it's trying to use, science and the idea of subtle nerves to explain, something that goes on, during your period and, why it should be considered unclean. Similarly, there are modern Kemetics, particularly of the Orthodox persuasion, that have tried to explain that when you're on your period, you're leaking energy. Well, before I give my answer to that contention, I'm going to consult an old friend. Meet Nichiren. He was a Japanese Buddhist monk who lived during the 1200s. That's 3 centuries before Inuyasha, for all you anime fans at home. And he founded a tradition that bears his name. Well, Nichiren was an upstart. He wrote open letters criticizing the shogun and the other Buddhist leaders at the time that were currying favor with the shogun, and Nichiren nearly got executed for it, and then exiled twice. But he also wrote letters to his lay followers, including women, and he wrote a letter to a certain Mrs. Yoshimoto, and that was in the year 1264, 860 years ago this year, and there's a translation of it here I'm going to read to you. And pay attention to the points that he raises and how similar it is to our situation now, 8 centuries later. This is a matter that concerns all women, and about which they always inquire. In past times, too, we find many persons addressing themselves to this question concerning women. But because the sacred teachings put forward by the Buddha in the course of his lifetime do not touch upon this point, no one has been able to offer any clear scriptural proof upon which to base an answer. When the Buddha was in the world, many women in their prime became nuns and devoted themselves to the Buddha's teachings, but they were never shunned on account of their menstrual period. Judging from this, I would say that menstruation does not represent any kind of impurity coming from an external source. It is simply a characteristic of the female sex, a phenomenon related to the perpetuation of the seed of birth and death. In the case of feces and urine, though these are substances produced by the body, so long as one observes cleanly habits, there are no special prohibitions to be observed concerning them. Surely the same must be true of menstruation. That is why I think we hear of no particular rules for avoidance pertaining to the subject in India or China. Now, to inject a little bit of information into this, I think there may have been some in these other countries, but in the tradition that he's coming from and in the education that he received at this point, there was nothing saying anything about it coming from the Chinese sources. He says, though, Japan, however, is a land of the gods. And here he's referring specifically to Shinto, the native tradition that does place a very heavy emphasis on purity and does have some specific things to say about menstruation. And he says, since the gods of Japan have in most cases desired that prohibitions be observed during the period of menstruation, perhaps people born in this country should seriously observe such prohibitions. However, I do not think that such prohibitions should interfere with a woman's daily religious devotions. I would guess that it is persons who have never had any faith in the Lotus Sutra to begin with who tell you otherwise. They are trying to think of some way to make you stop reciting the sutra, but they do not feel they can come right out and advise you to cast the sutra aside. So they use the pretext of bodily impurity to try to distance you from it. They intimidate you by telling you that if you continue your regular devotions during a period of impurity, you will be treating the sutra with disrespect. In this way, they mean to trick you into incurring an offense. And he says, if suddenly you should feel, for example, the approach of death, then even if you are eating fish or fowl, which was also an impurity if you were being a vegetarian Buddhist, if you are able to read the sutra, you should do so, and likewise chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which was their sacred mantra. Needless to say, the same principle applies during your period of menstruation. So think about this. In feudal Japan, hardly a bastion of female empowerment, you had a monk telling a woman, okay, there's the local regulations that are based on Shinto, that's one thing, but your faith is more important than any taboo. And you know what? I agree with Nichiren. Yes, we all know what the old customs have been. But that is why myself and all of our friends who join us every Friday practice Kemetic reform. Ancient sources are our bedrock, but we are reviving them into a modern world where not every uterus has to produce a child, nor should your uterus stop you from practicing your faith once every month. And you know what? People have been looking ahead to a world such as ours for longer than we might think. Consider that we had people discussing this in the Kamakura period in Japan. And Nichiren mentioned the subject of other bodily wastes, feces and urine. And you have other Eastern faiths, such as Hinduism and Islam, that do have taboos specifically regarding those. For example, after you've had a bowel movement, you're supposed to shower and change clothes before you come to a service in either Hinduism or Islam. The ancient Egyptians probably had similar beliefs and practices to that. So why are we not giving the same attention to those ideas around cleanliness and instead just zeroing in on menstruation? Could this be a double standard? So why don't we just go with the idea that Nichiren alluded to, that as long as you keep yourself clean and you put on fresh clothes for ritual, it doesn't matter what bodily functions you've had to contend with earlier in the day. We have the power to make informed choices about our religious practices and decide what ancient traditions are worth keeping and which ones are best left to history. And I think that taboos about menstruation belong in the past. So there you have it. Hopefully this gives you some further insight for your own personal practice. And before we go, I have some great news to share with you for 2024. First thing is, I'm going to include a link to an animation from my sister channel, Golden Age Video. If you haven't seen it already, please go and check it out, because I got to show it to someone who wants to show it to someone who is a producer. And I told them that I would like to pitch this for an idea for an animated sitcom. And so there's a chance that it might get to go to someone who could pick it up. So the more hits it has, the more feedback you can leave, the better it helps my chances when it comes to trying to pitch this. So that's something that I'm working on, and there's another animation that's a follow-up to that I'm going to be working on. And if you are one of my Patreon supporters, I will be showing updates and little images and things like that as I continue to work on it. So you'll get to see what is going on with that. And we'll have some new merchandise coming up for Patreon supporters. I'm also going to tie it in with a concept that's Egyptian in theme that actually I've worked on. I started work on this 20 years ago, actually, and it's something else that it's an idea that I've been sitting on for forever. But there's a manga that has come out called Enid. Volume 2 of it is coming out in March, so I will be doing a review of that later in the year, and I'll compare it with my own manga idea that I had so long ago about Egyptian deities, and particularly the myth of Horus and Set, and we'll see how they compare and contrast. So there's a lot of really exciting stuff coming up for 2024, and of course I have a stack of books to review, and it should be a lot of fun. So obviously hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss any of the fun stuff that we're going to be doing. Go on over to Golden Age Video and subscribe to that one too, so as I put new things up you'll get to see that as well. And if you can, drop us a super thanks and we'll have Kid Ptolemy do a happy dance for you. And as we go along the year, I'm going to be drawing an awful lot. I might slip in some drawings and have Ptolemy's dance repertoire expand a little bit. So there's lots of good things in store for this year. I'm really excited about it, and I hope you will join us for the ride. In the meantime, for the Kemetic How-To Guide, this is Sharon wishing you Senepti.
Enjoyed this video? Then be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Kemetic Independent channel. You can also buy my books on Lulu.com, and special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Join us for updates, outtakes, and exclusive videos only on Patreon. Check the description for links.